Hello, I'm your host, Dan Cluche. At this time, we'll go through part two of our vlog um, with a deeper dive into electricity. And we'll do that in 5 graphics and then focus on an intelligent response, which is cogeneration. Our belief is that and bias is as per the picture you see with the cow stuck in a power pole, is that we've kind of, due to lack of electricity literacy, inadvertently perhaps gotten ourselves into something of a fix. And so what will be intelligent responses to working our way through this in as healthy a fashion as possible is really the mission and the trick. And hopefully these 5 graphics will help spell out where much of the challenges come from and how we might better address it. So I found this work from a rather large international utility company and a local college with a significant, about 100-person research and development team. Really quite telling. Now, ATCO is a distributor of natural gas. They're a very large player in electricity overall, just a multifaceted, multi-country utility company. And so they looked specifically at an all-electric approach for Alberta. And this is a screen capture of their conclusions from a household standpoint. And what they point out first is that modeling is great stuff to do, and you can get models exactly right in my belief. But you have to be cautious. And what they found is, well, the model that was some premises were built on were not correct. And so the actual kilowatt hour of electricity use was almost double what the model originally suggested. And because of that, then your electricity bill was far and away more expensive. And in fact, this net zero objective, which was going to be a very low GHG emission, was actually really many times higher, many times higher. Despite a high incremental cost, which would have a very long payback because the savings weren't being seen. And that's despite using some great technologies, without doubt. We encourage upgraded building envelopes and have a good deal of experience with building envelopes, which have about a 2% exchange rate, which is just really great for high energy efficiency. And air source heat pumps, particularly in the right climates or certain seasons, work very well, as does heat pumps for water heaters. But in the coldest months in particular, they don't work very well, and they become very expensive to operate. And we encourage using as much solar PV or electricity generation as possible. But we understand that depending on where electricity prices are, it can be also a long payback. And then further, it's not that great in terms of overall energy efficiency of electricity production. And of course, there's 2,000 hours on average that will generate electricity of the 8,760 hours in a year. We can store it, but we're all familiar with the challenges there. So anyway, that was the conclusions, and yet somehow what we'll hear flippantly is that there's silver wands and magic bullets and blah 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 that as Bloomberg just puts forward here, is that we're going to increase supply to meet an increased electricity demand of 62% by 2050, and so our next cartoon just really says perhaps we need to be much, much more explicit in step 2, and so that's what we hope to achieve in this conversation. When we look back at generation capacity builds since 1940. It's very insightful and great numbers, and they tend to be more easily available numbers in the US than, say, Canada. So that's why we're using this chart. But anyway, what we saw is that, as always, when these large utilities build power plants, they hope for these plants to be highly productive. 30, 50 years, something like that is typically what the economics are built for. And so the lowest cost base load electricity producer has long been coal. And so that was the majority of plants in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even in the 80s. And then some things started to change, particularly the regulatory environment and permitting environment and so forth. And natural gas, as we can see, absolutely took off in an enormous way, trying to meet our ongoing enormous exponential growth in electricity demand. And yes, we've done hydro, and we've certainly spent a lot of money on renewable, and so it's contributing. But as you see, natural gas up to that roughly 2010 has been the far and away market share winner. And even when we look out at 2018, in terms of permit applications, we still see natural gas so far in advance of wind and solar. And that's a 67% growth rate as compared to 11% for solar PV or 22% for wind turbines. So there's reasons for that. There's energy literate folks that are looking and saying, of our power plants that we can build, which ones will give us the best economics? And that's been the predominant reason. And because that's been the predominant reason, we think in energy literate way, we really have to look at the dominoes that we face. Natural gas use continues to grow rapidly, and there's many pressures for that growth, and we're going to go into those in some more detail in a moment. Not least of which is that the largest reserve of oil left on the planet is heavy oil, Alberta being amongst the biggest, if not the biggest, reserve of heavy oil. And to melt the oil out of those tar sands, we use a tremendous amount of natural gas. And that's not likely to change. And when we're doing that, basically for 1 unit of energy in, we get 3 units of energy out. And so that's one of the reasons why, not the only reason why, but one of the reasons why we continue to see significant inflationary price pressure on oil. And then in addition, natural gas continues, as we just said, to be by far the largest producer of electricity. And as natural gas prices go, when you consider how many plants are operating and their delivery of electricity, natural gas is 70% of cost of goods sold. And so as gas prices go up, electricity prices in North America have no choice but to follow. And so all of this just highlights when we so often say energy is the master currency for all species and always has been. And where there is a scarcity of cheap energy, we have a lot of challenges. But of course, the flip side of the coin is there's a lot of opportunity, particularly for those that understand truly what is an intelligent response that we can bring to market and end up with a much better short payback time, better return on investment, etc. And so that's our opportunity for sure. So there's a lot going on. Right now for natural gas, there's literally a gold rush for what people will call renewable gas or biogas. And we think it's a good thing. We need many layers to address our overall energy picture. But we also have to be really realistic about what a layer can contribute. If we say, well, the savior is going to be biogas and it's going to basically allow us to do everything we want in the energy picture, of course, that's not remotely the case. As this shows, in the US, there's about 450 landfills and 87 incinerator plants that produce about 2 days of a year's worth of electricity. And that's going to go up. And it's going to go up exponentially with a number of the programs that are in place, as long as those highly subsidized programs are able to remain in place. We had high subsidies for solar PV in Ontario, as an example, and then they went away. And they went away for a reason. The taxpayer ends up cranky with covering all those subsidies, as they should. And wind has been very much the same thing in many geographies. Germany comes to mind in a very important way. And in the US, wind energy contributed 3 days of US power, solar PV 76 minutes worth, and that was as of 2009. Has that improved by 2022? Yeah, absolutely. It's gone up. There's been quite exponential growth, but we have to be really realistic. Are we at 20 days, 40 days of electricity production? And what percentage is electricity? Knowing all those answers is really the fluency that allows us to make sure that we have the right policies and we're making the right economic business decisions all the way around. See, right today, one of our new stress points for natural gas supply, without a doubt, is for a number of countries, is those that have and can export LNG. But what we've seen in a very short period of 2 years, LNG has climbed to an absolute record price, and therefore European gas, which is the demand driver, primarily because of sanctions cutting off Russian gas, has achieved record prices. And as I say, as natural gas prices go, so do power prices, despite what renewables are doing. And so we see record power prices in that very short 2-year time frame. And we've just started to see this aluminum price has gone up quite a lot more. But what we've started to see is a very rapid shutdown. Bloomberg suggested a couple of days ago that about 50% of all the US steel, aluminum, and other such high industrial plants have now also shut down. Really, really impactful. Just showing energy being the core systemic source of inflation, and it's just flushing through the economy. And really nothing at all gets untouched with that compounding inflation. And so it underscores just how important understanding these things are. See, when we wave a magic wand, some of the things that we might just flippantly say if we haven't done our research is, the US needs to move to hydro like Canada has done. Well, Canada is blessed with 3 provinces in BC, on Quebec, and in Manitoba that have a tremendous amount of hydro. The US and other parts of Canada are not so blessed. And certainly the US has put in a tremendous number of dams in places where they can, going all the way back in history to their share of Niagara Falls, obviously. But they're just not blessed with that endowment. And so therefore, they've had to do what they've had to do. And fossil fuels have been the heavy lifter. And they're not so far from being the heavy lifter in Canada, with the exception of the 3 provinces. Everywhere else, it's predominantly been coal, and we've been perhaps very unwisely phasing out coal. And so we kind of mislabeled this chart here, not to point out that those steam turbines and combustion turbines, if they weren't running on steam from coal, then they're running on natural gas. And that just is the energy mix. And what you'll see with this chart is, as much as we've pumped a lot into the green line, which is renewables, and it does some interesting things in the summer months in terms of capacity. On average, it can't, on an annual basis, achieve, or hasn't achieved, more than 15%, and that's not national, that's seasonal. And so as we've phased out coal, all it's meant is we've transitioned to natural gas, one fossil fuel for another. GHG intensity is less with natural gas, but are we going to the right places? Particularly as we look at things such as, for oil use, transportation is far and away the bulk of the use. And when we're using oil to do that, have our fuel very close to the burner tip. When we use electricity, we end up with that 35% efficiency in converting fossil fuels to electricity. And therefore, we have made our transportation sector less efficient. What else can you say? That is the reality. And when we look at thermal needs, which are hugely industrial, and then with places like, say, Canada that doesn't have much of that industrial base, despite having the resources to attract it, what we end up having to recognize is that as the US is repatriating, if you will, manufacturing from China, where it started going in the late 70s and accelerated in pace, and then as we've seen energy prices closing down, steel and aluminum plants, and et cetera, what it means is the U.S.'s requirement for its own natural gas, reusing coal, and hopefully dramatically increasing renewables are all layers of a solution that must be in place. And those two are really, really big pressure points, but we're not done, because as we see at the top, is we have a whole bunch of new electricity uses in addition to an attempt at electric transportation. And that includes Bitcoin mining and indoor cannabis growing and robots and the internet and LNG refrigeration. Well, what am I referring to there? Well, you can get some varying estimates of numbers, but when you take LNG to a port and then you refrigerate it to about a minus 160 degrees C, you'll have used, say, 25% of the fuel in that refrigeration process. And that is a new use, largely very recent new use of natural gas, and not an efficient one by any means. Maybe necessary for Europeans that are heating houses. Manufacturing plants are going to move where the energy is the least cost. They always have through the Industrial Revolution and going back to Roman times. With the internet and robots and Bitcoin, what we see is that today, data center alone, for example, is 3% of electricity use and growing. And that doesn't include Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's a very interesting development. I would love it if it could be what it is and not use energy. I guess we'd all love that. But in reality, to mine a Bitcoin today, we use 1,449 kilowatt hours, and that is the same amount of energy as the average US household consumes in 13 years. Really, really big pressure points. All right, so let's talk about a long known and held intelligent response. That's what's known as cogeneration, or combined heat and power. And it really goes back to Thomas Edison's very first plant that he built in New York. And he looked at it and he said, why would we generate electricity? We need to do that. But when we're burning electricity in a reciprocating engine or a turbine, most of the energy is lost as waste heat, exactly the same as how our cars operate today. And instead, why wouldn't we put that heat to use if we have our power plant right in a place that can use the heat, such as heating, in his first plant's case, a very large home or a factory or whatever it is. And so that's our comparison, is if we look at the power plants of today and the boilers of today, we will be very hard pressed to find that many boilers that are operating at above 80% and a good number below. There are 98% efficient condensing boilers. They don't always operate at 98%, despite some claims. And so the fact is, we're pretty efficient at the burner tip, as they say. But when we combine power plants that are wasting 65% of the energy that goes into them as low-grade waste heat, particularly because we don't like large power plants very close to cities for all the reasons you know. So that means on average in North America, we're about 35% electricity efficient. And so combined, we end up with useful energy being used in use at about 56%. If I'm running a condensing boiler, I'll be as high as 64%. But when we locate a combined heat and power plant And we're able to use the waste heat. When we're using that waste heat and we're producing electricity at between 31 and 42% electrical efficiency, we're going to be not less than 80% efficient. And we can sometimes be as high as 90 and 95% efficient. Well, that's fantastic. We're using the fuels that are so very precious so much more efficiently. That's what we so badly need. And we're reducing the GHG emissions without a doubt. This has been well known, as I say, since Thomas Edison's time. Through more recent times, Asia has adopted cogen in a big way. Much of Europe has adopted it in a big way. But for the most part, in North America, we have utilities that all too often make it, in many cases, impossible to connect these systems. And I mean impossible, to difficult and expensive and so forth. Our government policies sometimes in some jurisdictions have been favorable and very often not. So this is a really big change that we could make. Denmark made this kind of change and up their efficiency into this 80% level overall for the country, and they did it in less than a decade. And the fact is we can be more efficient than that in some applications, specifically in applications that can use the CO2. And, that's mostly greenhouses. There's probably a few other applications, but the bottom line is what we're showing here is that CO2 is valuable to greenhouses. They, in fact, buy it very often if they're not producing it on site. And so cogeneration can become trigeneration because it's providing heating, it's providing lighting, it's providing CO2. And then in other applications that have a need for refrigeration, we can turn the heat into refrigeration. And so now we can even be quad generation in those examples. And as I say, this has been widely used and expanding types of use in Asia in particular, but all over the place. And so this is an example that comes from Yanmar, a very large private company in Japan. They provide most of the engines for John Deere equipment, always have, virtually all models. And what they're showing here is they've literally gone so far in Japan as installing small anaerobic digesters, even on grocery store size, capturing gas methane from natural hot springs, from manures and so forth. Some cases they run 100% on biogas. Sometimes they blend the biogas with the natural gas, which is what we have going on more and more in North America as we're combining biogases as available. And in this case, they're running a cogen plant off of that. But you're actually getting very important natural fertilizers and soil amendments from this process. And so all the way around, just really increasing the efficiencies, really very positive developments. Yanmar continues to take this further, as do others. And so what you're seeing here is there's things that we can do, such as aquaculture and using the fish water to actually provide the nutrients to the plants. The plants clean the water and back to the fish. We can grow algae. We can end up producing either biogas through a bunch of these processes, or what's called 100% biodiesel. And we end up with engines available now, and more so going into the future, that in fact, the engine can be a diesel engine, a compression engine. It can use that biodiesel, petrodiesel, blend those without any difficulty. Across Canada, there's a mandate, government mandate, which is a good one, that says you must use 5% biodiesel in the blend. And then once the engine's started, you can start aspirating either natural gas and or biogas. There's some tuning things that are tricky, and Yanmar, for one, is been advancing and getting very good at doing dynamic tuning, basically by anticipating, if you will, what the blend of fuel is coming to the engine. Not easy to do. So, but anyway, where you're getting to is really dynamic, multi-flex fuel systems. And so we think those are really great intelligent responses, must be a much, much bigger part of our future. And a word from our sponsor, who is AgriHub. And AgriHub started as Penner Farm Services in 1956. They build farms. They've been very much a partner for farmers in automation since 1956. They have a pretty sizable power generation and backup power business unit, and have moved into biogases and cogeneration systems. And AgriHub has this brand name for North America because they have purchased in recent years a fair number of really well-known brands across Canada and into North and South Dakota. And so, as I say, a shout out to our one sponsor. Agro Resilience Kit is our second sponsor, and provide a very interesting, intelligent response for cooling. And what we're doing with this is that we use only about 5% of the electricity of a swamp cooler or evaporative cooler, and even less than a centrifugal electric driven chiller. And we also use about 50% less water than a evaporative or swamp cooler. In this example, in a greenhouse, we're cooling the 1/10 of an acre greenhouse by 20 degrees Celsius, using modernized materials, but really a technique that has been known for about 800 years, literally, and used in many, many buildings all over the world and so forth. What are we doing? Well, on the shady side of a building, cool air, the coolest air is close to the ground. And when we create a chimney effect, in this case using wind turbines, we're having the hot air rise and sucked out of the building, and therefore by way of the chimney effect, the cool air is being drawn in. And then in this yellow framed system, when we need additional cooling, what happens is we're misting along this whole top bar on the yellow frame. And essentially between two plastics or two membranes, we're creating a cloud, if you will, of much cooler air. And the cool air must drop, and it drops with a certain amount of velocity. And so when it does, it creates what mechanical engineers call buoyancy effect or wind effect. And so in this way, as I say, we're cooling a greenhouse which has tremendous passive heat gain. And we're cooling that by 6 to 20 degrees C, hardly using any electricity. And in dry climates, we're actually humidifying, which the plants really need so that they have the highest productivity. But in fact, these systems have also been installed a few times in the Caribbean. This is our latest in a resort in Anguilla. And by day, what we're able to do is cool the greenhouse substantially, increasing the productivity of the greenhouse in the prime growing hours of the day. And so with AgriHub, what we're incorporating is these sorts of technologies in airtight buildings, from sprung structures. We're doing this in a way that allows us to integrate a number of systems so that we can move in an intelligent, economic fashion to much closer, if not achieving, net zero. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to sharing part 3 with you.